everyone, my name is Kevin. I'm a project instructor for the Academic Writing Education Center here at National Taiwan University. And today, I'll be guiding you through your lesson. Today we'll be talking about stereotypes. Stereotypes are ideas about how people will act based on the group in which they belong. In other words, assumptions or beliefs that people will have about others, based on things such as their race, social class, or even appearance. Gender stereotypes are assumptions that a person might have about males or females. Many children grow up identifying certain characteristics as belonging to boys or girls. Despite the many roles men and women play in today's world, some people still judge others based on how they think men and women should act. This brings me to the purpose of today's lesson. The purpose of this lesson is to engage students in thinking about the idea of gender stereotypes and characteristics that are often ascribed or attributed to boys and to girls, or men and women. In this lesson, students will discuss their viewpoints on the consequences of gender stereotypes and how people should work against socially defined gender norms. So, let's begin. Let's first go over the goals and outcomes for this lesson. Upon completion of the lesson today, students will be able to understand the social issues in the reading and practice different reading strategies, predict the content of the text using different anticipation strategies, understand and use synonyms and different word forms, identify the main ideas of a text and the details that support the main ideas, understand the purpose and tone of a text, and identify the author's point of view. Express opinions and support them with examples from a text or personal experience and culture. Synthesize information and ideas. We've got quite a bit to accomplish today, but I know if we put our heart and mind into it, we can do it. Before we begin today's reading, let's do a pre-reading or warm-up activity. So this is what's going to happen. I will show you a statement, and I want you to indicate whether you agree or disagree with it. So, with each statement, think about it for a second and decide whether you agree or disagree with the statement. Let's begin. Men are better drivers than women. What do you think? Do you believe that men are better drivers than women? Women are more emotional than men. While we all have emotions, do you believe that women are prone or more likely to be even more emotional than men? Men are more career-driven than women. Do men reach higher level positions because they are more driven than their female counterparts? Nursing is a profession best suited to women. Do you believe that it's weird for a man to want to be a nurse, or do you feel that nursing is a job that should be carried out primarily by women? Boys don't take things seriously. In other words, do boys play around more and maybe care about things less? Computer science is a boys' subject. Do you believe that subjects such as computer science are more appropriate for men than for women? So, did you agree with any of these statements? If yes, then you may have stereotypes towards socially defined gender roles. So what is a gender stereotype? Gender stereotypes are assumptions about what people should do or how they should act or talk based on their gender roles. From an early age, we have a clear idea of gender roles, which influence preferences, behaviors, and choices. We often conform to these expectations and identify with them. These ideas come from all sorts of sources, our families, the media, and what we see in the world. Gender stereotypes are reinforced through unconscious bias, which affects our judgment, leading to bad decisions or discrimination against people. Now that you've agreed or disagreed with these statements, can you think of any real-life examples that support or challenge these beliefs? Has anyone ever treated you differently because they assumed these statements are true? Take a moment to think about this. I'm sure that if we really think about it, you can probably think of times when you were treated differently based on your appearance, beliefs, or even gender. For example, I grew up in the US, and I didn't understand when I was a child why everyone thought I was really good at math. However, later I realized that many people thought I was good at math just because I was Asian. All right, to begin with, as always, it's important to think about what you already know about the topic. Maybe this is a topic you're already very interested in and have read a lot about. Or maybe it's the very first time you've even thought of this topic. In any case, chances are you already know something about this topic. Let's practice our anticipation skills. Take a close look at the title of our first reading piece, as well as the quote below the title. I want you to take a minute and think of what you already know about the topic and what you think this reading will discuss. The title of our reading is Worth Less: Why Men and Women Devalue Career-Oriented Careers. The quote below states, if we're going to get real equality between men and women, we have to focus less on women and more on elevating the value of care. Take a minute and write down what you already know, and 2, what you think this article will discuss. You have 1 minute. So, are you done? Let's look at some things you might have come up with. I'm sure this is a topic that you've had some thoughts about at some point in your life. The title mentions things such as men and women and care-oriented careers. For what you already know about the topic, maybe you wrote down something along the lines of nurses, childcare workers, teachers, hospital workers. These are all types of care-oriented professionals. Maybe you also wrote, women tend to be more interested in care-oriented careers than men. Care-oriented careers usually pay less and are devalued in society. No matter whatever you already know about the topic, I'm sure you have some idea about what to expect from the reading. So, what do you expect to read? Maybe you wrote down something like, are men or women better at care-oriented jobs? Why do men and women devalue career-oriented careers? Why should we place more importance on care-oriented careers? How is the issue related to gender inequality? What are the advantages and disadvantages of pursuing care-oriented careers? What challenges would men and women encounter at care-oriented jobs? Do men or women experience more challenges? Before we actually read our first reading today, though, it's going to be important to be able to distinguish facts from opinions. Oftentimes, people confuse opinions with facts, or maybe even treat facts as opinions. A friend might say that Haagen-Dazs makes the best ice cream in the world, which sounds like a fact, right? But even though your friend might truly believe that Haagen-Dazs makes the best ice cream in the world, it's still only an opinion. In fact, how would you even decide on who makes the best ice cream in the world? Anyways, let's move on to distinguishing facts and opinions. Let me give you a moment to read through these items and decide on whether they are a fact or an opinion. You have 1 minute. Workers in healthcare and education play vital roles in the functioning of civil societies. What do you think, fact or opinion? This would actually be a fact. Imagine if there were no workers in healthcare and education. That would be like the beginning of a horror movie, don't you think? This statement is a commonly accepted fact that is indisputable. Let's move on to the second statement. In the United States, public funding for education has been cut by as much as 37% since 2008, prompting teacher strikes in several states to protest low salaries. This is also a fact. Well, it's a fact if it's true. What makes it look like a fact is that there is data and statistical evidence to support it, and it can be proven. Now, on to the third statement. Despite several waves of feminism and active efforts by governments, men and women continue to be disproportionately represented in the different types of occupations. What did you identify this as, fact or opinion? This statement is actually an opinion. In fact, it is the author's belief. What makes this an opinion and not a fact? Well, the main issue here is that disproportionately represented is quite open to interpretation. It's not very precise or clear for that matter. Are we talking about 49-51 or are we saying 10-90? My idea of disproportionately could be very different from your idea of disproportionately. Also, for example, let's say only 10% of nurses are men. Well, statistically, this number is quite disproportionate to 90% of nurses that are women. If I believe that nursing is a woman's job, then it wouldn't seem disproportionate to me. Now, let's look at a couple more statements and determine if they are fact or opinion. Again, take 1 minute to do so. Are you done? Let's begin with the first statement. Whereas an active literature seeks to understand and rectify this underrepresentation of women in STEM, much less attention has been paid to the equally sizable gender imbalance in communally oriented career. What do you think? Fact or opinion? In fact, this is an opinion, and not just any opinion, but the author's own opinion. What makes this an opinion is that it is not concrete. In other words, this is a statement that could be debated. Some people, like the author, believe that there has been much less attention that has been paid to gender imbalance in communally oriented careers, while others may think the opposite. There are no facts here to confirm. Of course, if the statement was something like, a majority of studies have found that there has been much less attention that has been paid to gender imbalance in communally oriented careers, then it would be a fact because it's something that can be proven. The key word here, much less attention, since people may interpret this differently. On to the next statement. Men's self-selection out of care-oriented roles might have negative consequences both for men themselves and those served by HEED professionals. So, fact or opinion? This statement is an opinion. How can you tell? The key word here is might. By using the modal verb might, the author is trying to express his or her own belief. For example, I might say that it might be a good idea for a family to get a puppy. Do I know for a fact that this is a good idea? I'm not sure. However, I think it's a good idea. Thus, might. Next statement. In the United States, where teachers stage walkouts to protest their low salaries, teaching is among the lowest paid occupations given training requirements. So, fact or opinion? In this case, this is actually a fact. At least in the United States, low teacher salaries are very common and is widely accepted fact that teachers do not make a lot of money. You might be asking yourself though, how can this be proven? Didn't the author use teaching is among the lowest paid occupations? Well, the trick here is that even though it is not very specific or descriptive, the words are true. We could check if we wanted to and see that yes, in fact, teachers make the lowest or among the lowest salaries. Now that you've anticipated what our reading will discuss, let's take some time to focus on word forms, specifically prefixes and hyphenated compound words. Oftentimes, we will encounter words that we might not be familiar with. Let's face it, English vocabulary is a horrible thing that can feel endless. However, even if you have never encountered a specific word before, we can use prefixes to help us to understand or at least guess at what that word means. Prefixes are word parts that appear at the beginning of words. There are many different types of prefixes in English, but for today, we will look at some common prefixes such as un, de, under, over, and this. Let's start with the prefix un. Un, more or less, means not, or the absence of, or a lack of. For example, unhappy can mean lack of happiness. The prefix de indicates removal or negation. For example, deformed means the removal of the original form, changing into something it was not originally. The prefix under is used to convey the meaning of too little or lower in status. So, for example, undergraduate versus graduate student, or underperform, meaning the performance is lower than the performance of others. Under is tricky though, because not all under is a prefix. For example, understand. Understand does not mean not standing enough or standing too little, so watch out. The prefix over is used to mean excessively or in a high position. For example, overachiever. Overachiever means to achieve in an excessive way. The prefix dis is used to express negation, absence of an action, or removal. For example, disprove. One meaning of disprove is to negate something that was proven before. This might seem like a lot to remember, but we encounter these kinds of prefixes all the time. Look hard enough in any piece of writing and they will be there. In fact, you probably already had some idea of at least some of these prefixes already. Now, let's look at these prefixes even closer. Here are two words that use the de prefix. In the context of our reading, the word devalue is used to convey the idea of making a position or a role less valuable. For example, those men and women who do choose healthcare, early education, and domestic roles are often devalued. What this means is that men and women who choose these roles are not valued for their contribution or not valued enough. Their contribution or work is made to seem less valuable than it actually is. Our next word from the reading, devaluation, refers to the action of devaluing. Many HEED professionals feel this broader devaluation. What's happening here is the article also uses the noun form of devalue. So, in other words, we can interpret this sentence as saying many professionals feel that people like them are being devalued. Let's move on. Our first word here is undervalue. The meaning of the word in the article means to treat as having less value than its real work. Care-oriented jobs have been undervalued, becoming one of the lowest paid occupations. What this statement is saying is that these jobs have been made to seem less valuable, less important, or less appreciated, which is why in the United States, these types of occupations make the least amount of money. Next is underrepresented. In our first reading, underrepresented refers to not being adequately represented or constituting a smaller percentage of population within the group. To date, women remain underrepresented in science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM fields, where they make up only 9 to 16% of engineers and 21% of computer programmers. So, what underrepresented means is that while in the world as a whole, the ratio of men to women is around 50-50. When we look at all STEM fields, only 9 to 16% of all the people in these fields are women. Thus, women are underrepresented in STEM fields. Overrepresented is kind of the opposite of underrepresented. Overrepresented means being representative excessively or in too large a number. Women are overrepresented in the low-paying, care-oriented careers, thus being perceived as worth less money than the male-dominated STEM courses. So, while there was an underrepresentation of women in STEM fields, there is an overrepresentation of women in care-oriented careers. Next is unpleasant. Unpleasant means not enjoyable, or in the context, causing a worrying or problematic solution. Try for a moment to imagine a world without teachers and nurses. Not only is this difficult to do, but it also paints an unpleasant picture. So, in other words, a world without teachers and nurses would be one that would not be very good to be in, or in other words, not pleasant. Disinterest. Disinterest means a lack of interest. It is believed that men's disinterest in care-oriented careers may be due to societal perception of most care-oriented professions as less valued and lower in pay. So, disinterest is a lack of interest. How are you doing? Are you hanging in there? That was quite a bit of vocabulary, but don't worry, we are almost done. Our next type of words are words that are hyphenated compound words, or words that are connected together with a hyphen. In our first reading, the author uses a lot of hyphenated compound words, in which two or more words, such as nouns, adjectives, or verbs, are joined together by a hyphen to express a unit of combined ideas. The purpose of using hyphens in compound words is to avoid ambiguity or confusion. In some cases, words with and without hyphens may have different meanings. There are different forms of hyphenated compound words. For example, compound adjectives can be made up of the following forms. A compound adjective could be a noun plus adjective, such as sugar-free, world-famous, or sky-high. It could also be a noun plus participle, such as decision-making, family-owned, care-oriented, male-dominated. Noun plus participle. It could also be adjective plus participle, such as long-lasting, narrow-minded, well-being, and low-paying. Compound adjectives can also be adverb plus adjective, such as well-educated, widely recognized, densely populated. Now, let's move on to compound nouns. Compound nouns, like compound adjectives, consist of two or more components. However, in this case, component nouns. Compound nouns can be formed in the following ways. Noun plus verb, such as president-elect, teacher strikes. Compound nouns can also be adverb plus noun, such as long distance, off campus, and well-being. Compound nouns can also be noun plus noun, such as bulletproof, scholar official, self-selection, status value. Next, compound nouns can also take the form of noun plus adverb, such as runner-up, passerby. Compound nouns can also be phrasal verbs, such as check up, check in, and walk outs. Finally, compound nouns can be noun phrases, such as state-of-the-art, parents-in-law, commander-in-chief. Now, you might be asking yourself, why do we have to connect all of these kinds of words together with hyphens? Well, there are a few reasons. One is that hyphens link the words together to express more specific meaning. Let's take long distance, for example. You've probably heard of long-distance relationships. In this case, we are talking about a specific type of relationship. Now, if we said the same thing without a hyphen, we are just describing a relationship as being of long in distance. The meanings are close, but they are not the same. Maybe a better example would be with check up with a hyphen. With the hyphen check up, a checkup is a visit to the doctor. Without the hyphen, it could mean to look up and inquire on someone, such as, I went to check up on my neighbor's dog. In this case, you can see a much bigger difference in meaning. Another reason for hyphenated words is that they have been so closely linked and used so often, they become standard. For example, well-being with a hyphen, well-being. If you type this word out in Microsoft Word without the hyphen, it'll tell you that something is wrong with it. This is because well-being has been used so often with a hyphen that is now a standard practice. Now, let's go through our first reading for today. I want you to read through the article. I've highlighted some of the words with the prefixes that we talked about, as well as the hyphenated compound words that the author uses. Before this lesson, you may not have known what these words mean, but now you will have some idea as to what their meaning is. Read through the article and be prepared to identify main ideas and supporting details.
Worthless: why men and women devalue care-oriented careers. If we're going to get real equality between men and women, we have to focus less on women and more on elevating the value of care. By Anne Marie Slaughter. Try for a moment to imagine a world without teachers and nurses. Not only is this difficult to do, but it also paints an unpleasant picture. Workers in healthcare and education play vital roles in the functioning of civil societies. Yet, as political scientists and policy analysts suggest, these positions are often devalued. On the one hand, men devalue care-oriented occupations, for example, teaching or nursing, as personal career paths. But in addition, those men and women who do choose healthcare early education and domestic roles are afforded both lower status and lower salaries in many societies. Many HEED professionals feel this broader devaluation. In the United States, public funding for education has been cut by as much as 37% since 2008, prompting teacher strikes in several states to protest low salaries. Given the important role of these care-oriented professions to personal and societal well-being, why are HEED careers not highly valued, both as occupational choices for men and for society as a whole? In the current research, we applied a goal congruency perspective to test whether men and women's endorsement of communal value to predict their personal interest in and perceptions of the broader societal worth of HEED careers. Despite several waves of feminism and active efforts by governments, men and women continues to be disproportionately represented in different types of occupations. To date, women remain underrepresented in science, technology, engineering, and math, so-called STEM fields, where they make up only 9 to 16% of engineers and 21% of computer programmers. Whereas an active literature seeks to understand and rectify this underrepresentation of women in STEM, much less attention has been paid to the equally sizable gender imbalance in communally oriented careers. In many HEED careers, men are markedly underrepresented, making up only 10% of nurses and 4% of preschool and kindergarten teachers in the United States. Men's self-selection out of care-oriented roles might have negative consequences both for men themselves and those served by HEED professionals. Thus, the first goal of the current research was to better understand why men are relatively less interested in personally pursuing HEED careers. As suggested by Slaughter, HEED occupations are not simply unpopular career choices among men. They are also generally devalued in society. HEED careers are assigned lower status and paid lower salaries than traditionally male-dominated STEM careers. In the United States, where teachers stage walkouts to protest their low salaries, teaching is among the lowest paid occupation given training requirements. Similarly, in other Western countries such as the United Kingdom and Germany, hourly pay rates in education and healthcare are considerably lower than those in scientific sectors. Such data suggests that HEED careers are, quite literally, perceived as worth less money than our STEM careers. And because women tend to be overrepresented in these low-paying HEED careers, sociologists have suggested that the tendency to undervalue care-oriented roles perpetuates the persistent gender wage gap women continues to face in modern societies. Despite such broad implications for important social issues, to the best of our knowledge, there has been no empirical social psychological investigation of the perceived societal worth of HEED or STEM careers. Thus, in addition to better understanding men's disinterest in HEED careers, our second and perhaps more important aim was to document whether people do in fact see HEED careers as having less worth than STEM careers. And if so, identify factors that predict this perception. We examined these questions through the lens of social role theory, goal congruity theory, and status value theory.
Done. Let's continue. Now, what I want you to do is this. Match the main idea with the supporting details in the list. Also, identify one statement from the main ideas column that is not stated in the reading. In other words, for each of these main ideas listed, there are supporting details, and probably more than just one supporting detail. Also, one of these main ideas didn't actually appear in the text. So, identify the supporting details for each main idea and figure out which main idea did not appear in the text. There are 5 main ideas on the list spread over this slide and the next. Let's take a couple minutes to complete this task. Are you done? Let's start off by identifying the main idea that did not appear in the text. If you identified B, both men and women support bridging the gender gap in STEM jobs more than HED jobs, then you are correct. This idea is not stated in the reading. It could possibly be presented in the later part of the reading, where the author discusses the research findings, but was not in the reading you just did. Now, let's see how you did with matching the supporting details to the main ideas. And here are the answers. How did you do? Were you able to get them all correct? If you had trouble or got some of these wrong, don't worry. You just need to pay more attention to the reading, identify what the main ideas are and how the author supports these ideas. What really helps is identifying what is a main idea and what is a detail or support. Now, let's move on and get ready for our next reading. It's time for anticipation. I will show you some pictures of famous athletes. As we look at each athlete, I want you to think of what words you might associate with these athletes and write them down. In other words, what do you think of when you see these famous athletes? Make sure to write down your answers. Do you have something to write with and something to write on? If so, let's begin. This is Kobe Bryant. Chances are you already know who he is. What are you thinking about when you see this picture? What words come to mind? Write them down. Take 10 seconds. This is a picture of Cristiano Ronaldo. If you like football or soccer, chances are you know who this person is. Cristiano Ronaldo is a Portuguese professional soccer player. Ronaldo is one of the most marketable athletes in the world and was ranked the world's highest paid athlete by Forbes in 2016 and 2017. He was also rated the most famous athlete by ESPN from 2016 to 2019. So, what words come to mind when you see this picture? How would you describe him? What does he convey to you? What words come to mind? Write them down. Take about 10 seconds. Our next athlete is Serena Williams. Serena Williams is an American professional tennis player and was formerly ranked number 1 in the world. Again, what does she make you think of? What words come to mind? Write them down. Take about 10 seconds. This is a picture of some members of the U.S. women's national soccer team. Unlike the men's team, the U.S. women's national soccer team is the most successful international women's soccer team, winning 4 Women's World Cup titles. In 2019, the U.S. team filed a gender discrimination lawsuit against the U.S. Soccer Federation. The lawsuit claims that the discrimination affects not only the amount the players are paid, but also their playing, training, and travel conditions. So, what does this picture make you think of? What words come to mind? Write them down. Take about 10 seconds. Done? Let's move on. Now that you have a list of words describing each athlete, take a look at what you wrote down. Decide if the words you wrote down are positive or negative when applied to male and female athletes. In other words, is the word a good thing or a bad thing? Also, is it good or is it bad when applied to a different gender? Do you have more positive associations with male athletes than female athletes who look big and strong? Did you notice any stereotypes about male and female athletes in these word associations? If so, how do you know they are stereotypes? What problems do you think these stereotypes might be causing? Why don't you take 2 minutes to look over your list of words and answer these questions? Now, time for some more vocabulary tricks. Earlier, we talked about how prefixes can help us guess at the meaning of words we might not know, and how hyphenated compound words are made. Now, let's use the idea of synonyms and antonyms to identify the meaning of words. Readers can use context clues to identify synonyms or antonyms within a text. Synonyms are words that have similar or very similar meanings, while antonyms are the opposite. They are words that have the opposite meaning. This strategy will help readers figure out the meaning of unknown words in a reading, as well as to ensure a better understanding of the passage. For this activity, I want you to read each sentence and match the bolded word to its synonym from the list. I have listed the sentence number for each of these sentences. If you want, you can look ahead at the reading and try to find clues in the sentences around each one. In fact, I highly recommend this. Are you ready? Look at the bolded word for each of the sentences and try to find the synonym or definition for the word. You'll have to get clues from the text, so go ahead and look through our second text and locate each of these sentences. Then, read through the sentences around them and see if you can find any clues to help you. Let's take a couple minutes to do so. Ready? Let's do it. Are you done? Let's go over your answers. At higher competition levels, the more likely it is for female athletes to savor the more aggressive elements of a sporting contest. What was your answer? Hopefully you answered E, enjoy. So how can you tell the answer is E? Well, if we look at the reading, after this sentence, the author points out a research finding suggesting that female athletes with non-traditional family rearing and greater engagement with more masculine interests have a greater desire to succeed in the more aggressive sports. From this, we can guess that the meaning of savor is to enjoy and appreciate. Let's move on. They found that long-term combat produced a fascination and enthusiasm for direct confrontation, which can override self-control and inhibition. What was your answer? What does override mean? Hopefully, you answered B, prevail over. Following from the previous passage, the current passage shows the contrast or the opposing behavior between direct confrontation and self-control and inhibition. In the following passage, this desire to beat an opponent where victory becomes paramount reveals that the result of the desire is to beat an opponent or prevail over self-control and inhibition. The desire to beat an opponent, whether that be in military combat or on the playing field, is similar and can lead to a single-minded approach where victory is paramount. What was your answer? If you answered F, principle, then you are correct. Paramount here means with greatest importance. Rather than focusing solely on the player's appetite for success, we also examined how their upbringing and exposure to stereotypes influence this feeling. What was your answer? If you answered A, childhood, then you would be correct. In the sentence right after this, the author talks about how a child is raised both in and out of the home. Non-traditional socialization can yield non-traditional outcomes. What was your answer? Did you answer D, the process of learning to behave in a way that is acceptable in a society? If so, correct. In the sentence before this, the author writes about how athletes view themselves and experience the world around them. That's the hint. Further research will serve to reduce stigma and raise more awareness to the challenge facing female athletes around the world. What was your answer? Did you answer C, disapproval? If so, correct. The clue here is in a previous sentence in the passage. In sentence 16, the author writes, breaking with tradition to perform in a sport that, until 1970, was exclusively reserved for males. Also, in sentence 18, a minority status, where they have not traditionally been expected to do well. Hopefully you saw these hints and were able to guess at the meaning of the word stigma successfully. Now, I want you to read through the passage again, this time paying attention to what the author is saying. Now that we've talked about some of the vocabulary here, hopefully it'll be much easier to read. Take a couple minutes to read through the passage. Pay attention to the author's purpose and tone.
How a girl is raised can influence her adult sporting success. The ability to produce peak performance plays a decisive role in the success of athletes in competitive sport. A desire to be the best is one of the most important traits in a top athlete. But where does this desire come from? Are we born with it, or is it a learned characteristic? Traditionally, research on female sporting success has focused on biological and genetic differences. A new study published in the open access journal Frontier in Psychology instead looks at the motivation level of successful female footballers and whether their upbringing influences this desire to succeed. We find that at higher competition levels, the more likely it is for female athletes to savor the more aggressive elements of a sporting contest. Says Danny Mayer-Parlapanis, who conducted this research as part of a PhD thesis with Professor Ronald Wellstone at the University of Constance, Germany. This is particularly the case when they have been raised in less traditional families and have greater engagement with more masculine interests and role models. Mayer-Parlapanis and her co-authors asked 90 female football players from the German Premier and Regional Leagues to fill in a questionnaire based on aggressive behavior research in military troops. They found that long-term combat produced a fascination and enthusiasm for direct confrontation, which can override self-control and inhibition. The desire to beat an opponent, whether that be in military combat or on the playing field, is similar and can lead to a single-minded approach where victory becomes paramount. The answers to the questionnaires reveal that players from Premier League, deemed as the more successful athletes, exhibit greater fighting spirits and more pleasure in the game of football itself. When this result was compared to similar findings in the competitive field, it suggested these players are less susceptible to distractions, fear, and stress during the game. But rather than focusing solely on the player's appetite for success, explains Mayer-Parlapanis, we also examined how their upbringing and exposure to gender stereotypes influenced this feeling. She continues, how a child is raised, what toys and games are accessible, and what role models they see, both in and out of the home, all place direct roles in how they view themselves and experience the world around them. Non-traditional socialization can yield non-traditional outcomes. In this case, female athletes breaking with tradition to perform in a sport that, until 1970s, was exclusively reserved for males. Additionally, moving further away from female stereotypes, many of these female athletes do more than simply playing the game. They savor the battle on the pitch. The authors of this study hope that their research will be used as a basis for examining how those with a minority status deal with and success in areas where they have not traditionally been expected to do well. Mayer-Parlapanis concludes, in sport, there's a long road ahead for male and female equality in pay, status, and media attention. Further research will serve to reduce stigma and raise more awareness to the challenges facing female athletes around the world.
Are you done with the reading? Let's determine the author's purpose and tone. Are you ready to answer some questions about the reading? Let's begin. What does the author want to accomplish by beginning the article with the question, a desire to be the best is one of the most important traits in a top athlete, but where this desire comes from? Are we born with it, or is it a learned characteristic? Take a minute to read through the answers. Select the answer you feel is correct. If you selected B, then you are correct. The purpose for starting the reading with this question was that the author wanted to draw your attention to this issue. Moving on. What is the author's purpose for providing Mayer-Parlapanis' questionnaire results on the German Female Football League players? Read through the possible answers and select what you think is the correct purpose. You have 1 minute. If you selected B, to explain how the desire of female athletes to succeed in sports is influenced by their upbringings and exposure to social norms, then you are correct. Moving on. What's the author's purpose for writing this article? Read through the answers and select the one that you think is correct. Again, you have 1 minute. If you selected C, the author wants to inform the reader that family upbringings and social norms affect female athletes' desire for success, then you are correct. Congratulations! You have finished both of your readings for this class session. How does it feel? Was it easy, difficult, interesting, boring? Did you learn anything? Hopefully, you've learned some strategies for anticipating what a text will be about, and a few strategies to use to identify vocabulary you might not be familiar with. Now, for your extension activity. After you finish the readings 1 and 2, write down your response to the following questions and be prepared to discuss them in the next class meeting. Think of 3 gender stereotypes in your own society. What are the arguments used to support those stereotypes? How could you refute those arguments? I won't give you a timer this time, so do this in your own time. But remember, you need to bring your answers to these questions to your next class. If you're interested in reading more about the topic, check out these 2 links. I think you might enjoy them. Now, this brings us to the end of this portion of your class. Today we did quite a few things. First, we used anticipation strategies to think about what we already know about a topic and to make some guesses at what the reading was likely to talk about. Next, we used prefixes to help us determine the meaning of some words. Using prefixes is a really useful strategy for guessing at what a word means. The number of vocabulary words in English is more or less infinite, or at least feels that way. There is no way anyone can remember all the English words. However, with strategies like looking at prefixes, we can guess at what some words might mean. You'll be surprised how accurate and helpful this is. We also looked at hyphenated compound words and how they are formed. What's great about these types of word combinations is that they let you be even more specific and descriptive with your language. You will see them quite often in your readings too. Why not try it out the next time you have to write? Next, we looked at guessing at word meaning through synonyms and antonyms and context clues. When we find a word we don't understand and there is not enough information within the sentence, we can always look before or after the sentence for clues. Again, you'll be quite surprised how often this works. In addition to these reading skills, we've talked and read quite a bit about gender stereotypes. Hopefully our discussions, activities, and readings have helped you to see that gender stereotypes are prevalent or common, yet that doesn't mean they are okay. Thank you for taking the time to go through this lesson with me. I wish you the best in your reading and connecting journey. Thank you.